Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Sharp, licensed psychologist, group practice owner, and private practice coach. Many of y'all know that I have been using therapy notes as our practice EHR for over 10 years now. I've looked at others, and I just keep coming back to therapy notes because they do it all. If you're interested in an EHR for your practice, you can get 2 free months of therapy notes by going to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. This podcast is brought to you in part by PAR. The Clinical Assessment of Attention Deficit Adult assesses symptoms of ADD and ADHD in adults. Now you can administer and score the CATA on PAR iConnect, PAR's online assessment platform. Visit parinc.com/CATA. Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Testing Psychologist. I'm glad to be here. Today's a business episode, but it's a little bit unique, or a lot unique, I suppose, because my guest and I get into a live coaching session on the podcast. And unlike what is typical for me, this time I am the one being coached. So my guest, Scott Robson, is an experienced and compassionate coach, creative, and connector who supports fellow entrepreneurs in the very human experience that is running a business. He helps them find their unique voice, gain self-trust, and claim their space in the world. So Scott and I actually do, like I said, a live coaching session where he walks me through his recently released adaptotypes for business owners. We identify my type. We talk through a situation that has been concerning for me and bring the work to life a little bit. Now, this was certainly an exercise in vulnerability and risk for me to do something like that so publicly and talk about a relatively personal issue. And that's perfect for this episode because Scott likes to focus on the risk and vulnerability of running a business. So I hope you enjoy that. We talk about, risk and vulnerability quite a bit. We talk about how, as business owners, we do our best to keep ourselves safe. And sometimes that means employing mechanisms or behaviors or thinking patterns that don't serve us as well as they could in our businesses. And then, of course, we spend a fair amount of time bringing this to life in the coaching session. So I hope that you enjoy this somewhat unorthodox episode of The Testing Psychologist with guest Scott Robson. Scott, hey, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy.
Yes, I'm glad to have you. We were introduced by a mutual acquaintance who came to Crafted Practice last year, and she said, "You have got to talk to Scott. He has transformed my business." And, I can't turn down an intro like that. So I'm glad that we got connected, and I'm excited for this conversation.
It was very kind of her.
Certainly. So I'll start with the question I always start with folks, which is, of all the things that you could spend your time and energy on in this world, why spend your time doing what you do?
Yeah, it's a great question that actually feels quite complicated to answer in some ways, which I'm sure is how a lot of people feel when they come on and answer this question on your podcast. For me, I think when I first started out in my professional career, I was in the publishing industry for over 15 years. My life was very bifurcated between design and also self-development, and it came together at the end of that publishing journey when turns out working in magazines is not really like the industry that is growing by leaps and bounds these days. So there was a moment when I had to really make a decision as to what my future was going to look like after I was just the last man standing after so many rounds of layoffs. And I realized that, the axe was going to eventually swing down on me as well. And I had done coaching training early on in my career, almost 15 years beforehand. I'm a 80s latchkey kid. right? And so for
Sure.
me, it's the self-development really was something that I was drawn to because it felt like it sort of filled a gap for me, as far as I was very good at spending time with myself. I was really good at I really enjoyed relating with people and helping people, but I needed to do a little bit more of that inner work. And so when I went into coaching and getting that formal training, that really helped me make some real connections and heal some things within myself. And then when I left the publishing world, I decided to get my second certification, and then I after that got a third certification. And I was really drawn to working with entrepreneurs. I had worked with a lot of small businesses while I was in publishing. We had luxury city specific magazines where we had a lot of small businesses in those magazines. And so they were right there alongside, large international luxury brands, right? So you'd have this small luxury, jewelry company, and then 3 pages later, you'd have, an Audemars Piguet ad for, this beautiful watch. And so I
Mm.
loved the commitment that these small businesses had to their passion. And I think that it's probably one of the most courageous things that you can do is going out and opening your own practice, your own business. And they just inspired me on a daily level. And so when I left, I realized that this is actually where I wanted to focus on in my support. And so that's what I did. And so I opened my practice almost 10 years ago now, and I've been doing it ever since.
I love that. I love that. I love how you call it your practice. That's maybe not the first word I would have chosen, knowing what I know about what you do. And so maybe that's a good intro just to kind of briefly tell people what you do. We'll get into the nuts and bolts a little later, I think, in terms of the actual, what it looks like. But just big picture, how would you describe what you're doing for folks?
Yeah, I work with really courageous, open-hearted, wholehearted entrepreneurs, and in their journey of owning a business. I always say we're just humans that happen to have businesses, right? And
Mhm.
that's how I really like to approach working with people. I work with them, with my clients, both one-on-one. I also have my own group programs. I facilitate and coach trainings, and I also work in other capacities as well within businesses, as far as being an internal coach in some businesses, after I've worked with some of those CEOs. So yeah, so I really think that this work is really important. I think that one of the things that a lot of we're taught, maybe it's sort of modeled for us, is that we really need to silo who we are as business owners. And so for me, my approach is really about de-siloing that. How do we actually get the whole person into their role as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, and feeling that we're allowed to do that. We're allowed to take up room in our businesses, in whatever way feels right for us. And so that's something that I really just firmly believe. And yeah, and that's really like what I follow as far as my philosophy goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's you use that word de-siloing in our conversation, before recording, and I want to spend a little bit of time there because that was not immediately intuitive to me how that applies to business, and so I would love to dive into that a little bit. First, like when you say siloing ourselves in business, what does that mean? And then we can flow into the opposite. So, what does it mean to de-silo ourselves in business?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think we all do this at some point, right? When we feel like we're on the back foot, or that we're maybe not exactly the experts that we need to be when we're maybe in a crowded room full of other experts. There's an acting as if. And there's a certain persona that may step forward. And I think that makes total sense, right? We're really just trying to keep ourselves safe, which is very much a philosophy that I follow, that really is so much of our behaviors, right? And so what ends up happening is that if we commit to that persona over time, it becomes a pattern. And that pattern becomes the silo that we live in. That is the persona that we need to step into in this role because it's what's expected from us. And we think that it's keeping a certain it's keeping us safe, and it's in a way that is really effective and is also portraying a certain um, role as far as how we've seen it done properly, quote unquote, in the past for us. And so the de-siloing is when we actually take a little bit of a closer look at that. And we actually come to see, is there any way that we can actually have all of your different aspects play a role in who you are as a business owner? And so that might mean actually designing that for the first time, right? We may not want all of our different aspects to be a part of this business persona that we have. There's certain levels of appropriateness. We don't want our inner 4-year-olds running our business, for example.
Sure.
But we certainly can do something that's a lot more holistic and a lot more connected to our values and our wants and our needs as people. And I find that when we do that, that's when we get authentic business owners. That's where we get people who, when they walk into a room, other people breathe a sigh of relief. They feel comfortable around them. You're able to share your opinions and not make it mean anything, right? When other people don't agree with you about those things. You can stand on your own, but then also feel really at home within yourself. And I think that's ultimately the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of overlap with imposter syndrome or values driven practice. I mean, both of those terms kind of popped up as you were talking, and you're nodding, so that tells me
Very much
maybe
so.
I'm
Very
on the
much so.
right
Yeah.
track. Yeah.
Yeah. I think in the Venn diagram of it all, there's absolutely a huge amount of overlap, especially with imposter syndrome. Um,
Right.
but my approach is also very compassionate.
Mm.
And I really believe I always say there's a damn good reason why you're doing what you're doing, right? Even when it
Yeah.
feels like it might be in some way self-destructive. At the end of the day, we're always just trying to keep ourselves safe from some sort of perceived psychological risk, whatever that is. And that's always going to be based on your biography. It's always going to be based on what was modeled for you, what you've seen happen for other people. And so there's always a reason why we do what we do. So if we take that angle of real compassion, then we can just relax. We can be okay with whatever this behavior is. And we can offer ourselves a little bit of, just like a hug,
Mm.
and then we can sort of move on in a really sort of wholehearted way. And we can create something that actually feels connected and a little bit more aligned, frankly, with what our goals are, which that's at the end of the day, really one of the most important things here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm totally on board with all of this, and I'm sure I've seen this is really hard for folks at different stages of their business. I mean, I see it in the beginning when people are launching their practices. They don't want to be totally transparent that they don't know what they're doing, or they're feeling insecure or scared about getting enough referrals. And then, it comes on later down the road. And as we hit different stages of our business where, we don't want to be authentic and let people know we're struggling, or maybe I don't have all the answers, or maybe my practice actually isn't as profitable as people think it is, and things like that. Like, it can just come up in so many ways, and can be really hard to actually overcome that or work with it, right? So I'm curious
Absolutely.
how you might dig into that with people, and I suppose encourage or just make it a little safer to be more authentic and do this de-siloing.
Yeah, yeah. Such a great question. I think what the my goal, of course, always is first when I'm working with my clients, and I'm sure it's true for anybody who is in the sort of helper space, whether or not you're a coach, you're a therapist, or something else. Um, them feeling a sense of psychological safety is the most important thing. And so how we do that is we really look at how their sort of unconscious beliefs are really driving them, right? And we look at that through the view of whatever's going on for them, right? Whatever that specific current situation is. And what we get to see is that there's an actual system at play here that's keeping us at arm's length from that risk. And once we're able to see what that system is and how we perceive that there's something off here, there's something wrong here, and then there's this discomfort that we feel in our bodies, or in our mind's eye, we're either flashing forward to potential future or flashing back to something that's happened to us, right? And then we develop some sort of mechanism to take us out of that discomfort, right? So that mechanism could be, um, really proving yourself. It could be just feeling paralysis. It could be placating, like you were saying, like everything's fine, everything's great, right? There's no problem here. I'm making enough money, when the truth is maybe that's not so true.
Mm.
Or we procrastinate, or whatever that thing is. Um, we're really just trying to keep that risk at arm's length. And that risk could be a lot of different things. Like you were saying, it could be failure. It could be success. It could be feeling rejected. It could be a conflict. It could be even a sense of complexity, right? Like this feels really big and really, really hard, right? That's a risk. And so once we're able to understand what that risk is, there's usually a way that we can get out of it. What happens for a lot of folks is that also once they understand the system that's in play here, like I was saying, then suddenly it makes sense, right? So we're just trying to keep ourselves away from that, not just that risk, but that feeling of physical and psychological discomfort that we're feeling. And what tends to happen if that goes unaddressed is that it can settle into something that I call a pattern. And that pattern can be, for example, I don't do conflict.
Sure.
That pattern can be, I'm not someone who is visible marketing my business. I'm not someone who's good with money, right? So it ends up being these deep-seated, almost protective beliefs. And what these beliefs do is that they keep us away from that risk.
Mm.
And so when we're able to understand how this all works, it just unlocks something. And we go, gosh, doesn't that make so much sense? Knowing what I've been through, knowing what I've seen, knowing the things that have happened, right? That I would be particularly sensitive to that risk. And once people are able to make that connection, suddenly the risk, it just sort of lessens, right? It just feels a little bit more approachable, right? And this is the
Yes.
compassion-based work. And then the work goes on from there, right? And we sort of see how can we expand your self-concept a little bit to actually include a little bit of this risk, so that way we could start to just feel a little bit safer with it. We can include it in our worldview of what we can handle, and then the dominoes start falling pretty quickly after that.
Yeah. 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 You keep using the word risk, and this was interesting, as we were tackling this and sort of thinking about what to talk about here today. You were one of the only folks I think that I've talked directly with anyway, who is like taking this head on and really acknowledging sort of the risk and the vulnerability of running your own business, opening a business, running a business. And I just want to make that observation and just create more space for us to chat about that, because when you said that, I was like, yeah, this is a huge risk. Like there's a ton of vulnerability. You're just like completely putting yourself out there, like your financial situation, your reputation, everything is just kind of like on display for anyone who might be watching. For a
All
lot
on the
of us,
table.
that's yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and this is
exactly.
why, again, de-siloing is so important, right? Because this is when we realize that while it may not be appropriate that our inner 6-year-old should be running our business, sometimes he or she is actually, right? And so our relationship with a risk, with some of these risks can feel what I like to call soft, right? So it's a sort of a soft, like it feels like a bruise is there, right? It's just a little bit more sensitive. And so when we're able to actually look at, well, what is it about, for example, judgment of other people? Like what about that is, where did that come from? Right? What is the origin of that? And we're able to look at that. That's when we say, oh, there's a really good reason for this, right? And so we're able to actually then start making some decisions and choices from our business. And after doing this work from a place of a lot more of a healthier adult space, right?
Mhm.
And suddenly it's like those experiences aren't informing our on the spot decision making that we're making in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? So but it's so unconscious, we're not even aware that we're doing it, right? So this is why, like, I have so much love for anybody that has a business because I just feel like it's all going to come up. It's all going to come up in our businesses, right? And so let's just welcome it in and let's do the work so that way we can get you to a place where you're actually, in your most settled, rooted self, making decisions from that place.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'll say, I don't know what you found with people you've worked with, but I feel like it took me a long, long time, like way longer than it should have, to come to grips with this whole thing. That, yeah, I had a friend, now friend, back then was a coach of mine, and that person said, whatever is going on personally is going to show up in your business. And I was like, yeah, yeah, of course, like that makes sense. But it took a long time for that to really sink in and to become aware of some of those patterns that just keep popping up and getting in the
God, it's so
way.
true. It's so true. Absolutely. I mean, and like we never get it right. I just want to say this,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not like you do this work and you're like, hey, I'm cured of all self-doubt. And like I'm never feeling overwhelmed. I had a presentation to a board yesterday evening, and just like when you can't get the words out and it just you're gumming it up, and it's the Zoom opens up and it's like 15 heads, and they're like, okay, floor is yours, and you didn't realize it was going to be quite that quick.
Oh my
So you
gosh.
start
Yeah.
tap dancing. I was like, and I got my footing and it was fine, and it was good, even though I was so prepared. And I closed the Zoom call, and of course the first feeling you think is like, ah, I really biffed it those first like 5 minutes, like I was really just tripping over everything that I wanted to say. And then I said, do I always have to do this? Can this one time, can we just be okay with that and let it be? It's going to be
Mhm.
what it's going to be. And it just felt so much better, right? And that's where like that sense of self-worth comes in, I feel like, in doing this work as well, where you can be with, we're talking about complexity, the complexity of these feelings, and not have it mean anything about who you are. And I think that you can just sort of sit within the discomfort of that and not let it run away with you. And so that was a really uncomfortable moment that I had after I closed that Zoom call for about 10 seconds. But I think really, so what this work is about is not eliminating it, because it's just not going to happen, right? We're human beings. But I think what it does do is that it shortens the time, right? So you can work through it so much more quickly, and you can get to the other side of it, and you could just have a healthier relationship with these moments when they do happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hearing you talk about it, sounds like there are a lot of elements of mindfulness or something like that in this whole process. Is that just personally part of your life? It seems like there's some practice here.
Yeah, for sure. That's so funny that you picked up on that. You're so perceptive. I actually started meditating when I was about 7 years old. I
Seven?
was
Did you say
seven.
seven?
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I didn't realize I was meditating at the time. I was very lucky. One of my closest friends, he's my oldest friend in the world to this day. He and I became friends in like kindergarten. And when we were 7, he happened to move in next door to us without even realizing that. And his mom was and is just an incredible person. And so she had a lot of kids in her house having sleepovers, bouncing off the walls at 11 p.m. And so what did she do? She was herself had done a lot of mindfulness work. And she sat us down and she taught us how to meditate. And I've been meditating ever since then, right? And so that also led me to becoming involved with the Buddhist community in New York City before I moved out. Now I live in Los Angeles, between Los Angeles and Vienna. But it got me involved in that. I've done a lot of work in that space. And it's just threaded itself through all of my coaching practice for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's super, super powerful. Whatever you call it, mindfulness or meditation, but just that awareness and that ability to sort of
Yeah,
create more of a window, between the event and the reaction. It's
for sure.
super
Widen
valuable.
that gap out as much as you can, right?
Oh my
That's where
God.
freedom is. Absolutely.
Yes, 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 yes. So talking about all this, there's like these feelings are coming up in our businesses, and I mean, this as a coach, right? Like we can tell people what to do all day long, but this is the stuff that kind of gets in the way. Like I don't know. I ultimately feel like people probably usually know what to do, whether it's like marketing or what to put on their website or, how to set their fees or whatever it may be. But it's this emotional stuff that gets in the way, that keeps people from doing the thing, that they know they should do. And so
Absolutely.
it's crucial to work through some of this. And that's really what caught my attention from your work, is that you pair kind of the coaching with the marketing and,
Yeah.
design stuff. And that's super valuable, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things that I love about sort of melding this all together with coaching and marketing and all of that and the mindfulness, you know, typically when my clients come to me, they sort of know what they should be doing, right? They should be marketing themselves more. They should be maybe more visible. They could be doing all of these things. Generally, that's not the issue, though. Those are things that you can find out on your own, right? You can read a book, you can go online. There's a lot of really great people out there who with great tips, and there's generally not one way of doing it. So you can find what is going to work for you. Um, what I've found, though, is that all of the researching, right, all of the thinking about it, it doesn't really require anything new from us, right? We can be researching and it feels very, very safe. We can have all the information that we need. But when we actually start to take action and put ourselves out there, it actually is going to require us to be something new and trying on something new, right? And this is when this idea of am I going to face plant in front of everybody that's ever known me, right? My business going to fail? Am I going to look foolish in front of my colleagues and peers? This is where the coaching comes in, right? And so it's sort of embracing these actions that actually require something from us as far as like expanding our sense of who we are. That tends to be really, really a little crunchy. And that tends to be also where overwhelm steps in as well.
Right, right. And the overwhelm, what we do and how we respond to overwhelm and stress seems to be a kind of a linchpin in this whole process. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. It's ultimately the reason why we do or don't do almost everything, to be completely honest. Our relationship with self-doubt, our relationship with stress, our relationship with overwhelm, our relationship to those risks that I was talking about. And also the relationship to the self-identification of those stories that we tell ourselves, to keep ourselves at arm's length from those risks. All of those things play a huge role in how we actually show up in our businesses, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of this work is simply how can we neutralize all of that so that way we actually have choice. Because what happens is when those automatic thoughts come through, we tend not to have a lot of choice in them. It's just sort of like, well, this is the world. This is how the world works, right? This is how my world works. This is who I am. And so when we get to talking about the gap, this is so perfect. We get to widen that gap a little bit and say, hold on a second. Can we just stop that thought for a second? Can we actually slow this whole process down? A lot of my work, I feel like, is just slowing it down. Like, slow it down. What is actually happening? So you can take a look at it and you're like, oh my God, why am I thinking that? That's not really something that's helping me, is it? And once we're able to do that, then I'm like, great, let's start. Now we can begin.
Yes. Yes. Well, and a part of that, in my understanding, you've thought fairly deeply about this and have found a way to sort of group folks into certain profiles, right? Like yeah. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is something that I launched recently, and it's called your entrepreneur adaptotype. And it's something that's on my website. I'm really excited about it. I've been mulling it over for years. And about 6 months ago, I finally decided, let me write this down. I wasn't sure what it's going to be, if it's going to be a book or something, and maybe it'll turn into something. But for right now, it's something that I'm just really excited to share. And the idea of the adaptotype is that, as entrepreneurs, our ability and capacity to be able to adapt to circumstances is both one of our biggest strengths, but it's also a source of the sort of self-imposed limitations, right? It really constrains how we show up, how we act, how we feel, how we think, and what also we think is achievable for our goals. So it actually impacts the goals that we set for ourselves, right? I'm not that sort of person who can do ABC. I can only do DEF, right? And so it really tends to sort of narrow things out. So this idea of entrepreneur adaptotypes, right? It's really designed to look at all these 6 different ways, these different styles that best characterize what I call your adaptive behavioral style, right? As a business owner and as a leader. And so your adaptive style is really how we show up in overwhelm, and also how we're showing up when we've learned that we need to avoid overwhelm historically. So it's actually there even in what we believe are neutral moments, right? And everyday circumstances. So this could be when you're just like walking through the door at work, right? And you're feeling good in certain relationships in your life. During specific events like travel, going to the doctors, or like Thanksgiving dinner, frankly, things might feel like everything's good now, but you're sort of waiting for like, your aunt, your uncle to say something. So each type of these, they come in with their own strengths and weaknesses, and they just shed light on how you navigate challenges, and just the inherent wisdom that's embedded in each style, and also how it limits us and how we can grow past that in order to get to more of a place of choice.
So I'm looking forward to digging into this. And before we do that, I want to ask maybe an obvious question, maybe not. We'll see. But there are, I think, a lot of typologies out there, right? And personality, and what we do and how we do it, and categorizing people and all of that sort of thing. So as I was looking at this, when you sent it ahead of time, I just got to thinking. I was like, there's a meta process here. Like, what led you to, I guess, have the self assurance or something along those lines of creating a new thing when there's plenty out there, I would say, that kind of falls in the same realm. Like I'm just imagining going through that, like, who am I to create this? I'm projecting onto you, but I'm just curious about the process for you, to do something like this.
That's a I love that question so much. It's so funny. One of the things I think that we all have elements and gifts that we are pretty solid with, that we're like, no, I'm good. I'm that's something that I can rely on myself for.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that I have always just fallen into quite easily is finding patterns, and seeing the underlying systems of those patterns. Everybody on my father's side of the family is an engineer, and so I really feel like I got that brain, but I've sort of like a fire hose focused it on the sort of the way that people think, right? Instead of taking apart lawnmowers and large machinery. But I think so for me, I was really I had this experience when I was working with clients where I just started automatically being like, oh, okay, like they're struggling with this. That reminds me of this other group of clients that I've worked with. And then I'd meet with somebody else and say, oh, struggling with this reminds me of this other group of clients that I'm working with. And the theme, the thread that really ran through them all is how were they working with or trying to avoid overwhelm? And so this goes to the heart of what we were saying in regards to just like their self-concepts, their relationship with self-doubt, and all of those perceived psychological risks. And so eventually and honestly, it started as a notes on my iPhone, like a notes page. I just started taking some of these notes, and I started looking at, for example, what are their challenges, right? What are they overwhelmed by? How do they feel about goals? Right? There's different things like goal orientations, right? So like, how are they actually like feeling about goals? How they either add to their business, add to their lives, or are they pretty agnostic about it? How do they avoid overwhelm? Right? And also, what are their growth edges? And so that's what I started with, and I just started filling this out. And it soon started to become very, very clear to me that we have these 6 different types. I would go around, I'd explain this to a few people, to a few other colleagues, and this is something that's landing for you. And they're like, yeah, this actually really fits in with what I'm seeing too. And it really ended up becoming fleshed out. It took me about 4 months to put together. And I've got, I'm still continuing to refine it as I get more data in. But what I will say is that as opposed to personality types, the one warning I would give is that this is not a personality type, right? This is not who
Yeah.
you are. And that's why
Yeah.
I called it an adaptive style. This is how we adapt. This is a strategy that we've adopted around overwhelm. And so it just explains our relationship to that overwhelm. So that can change. And so none of these are actually fixed at all. However, they do have the gifts of some strengths that they've given us because we've had to develop those strengths in the face of this overwhelm. So great, let's claim those. Let's keep
Mm.
this. We can keep all the strengths. That's fine. Right. But
Hmm.
also, what
Hmm.
choices then do we have once we're able to sort of like shake this tree a little bit and loosen up around this? What other choices do we have so that way we're not quite so limited within this certain type? And so that was really the goal of creating the adaptive types.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great. Yeah. It's such an undertaking. Have a lot of respect and admiration for something like this, and appreciate you just sharing a little bit more about the process and
Yeah.
how it happened. Yeah, I would love to dive into this if you're game for that.
I would love it. I took a little peek before we jumped on our call what your adaptive type was, and you had the keynote. Is that right?
That's right. That's
Yeah. So
right.
tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about when you got your results and you looked through the results and read them. How did this land for you?
Yeah, yeah. So this was interesting to me because the page when it kind of shows you your adaptotype, it gives you this like main headline, right? And it says you cultivate strong, enriching relationships that nourish and fulfill. So right off the bat, I mean, and maybe this is the self-doubt talking, but I was like, that is, I think, aspirational for me. I don't know that I'm as good at it as the type would tell me, but maybe that's the way I answered the questions too. So just like right off the bat, I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm having imposter syndrome with my adaptotype already, but the rest was, it really hit like the part about becoming overly focused. Like when I am overwhelmed, I get super focused on like perfectionism, like digging really deep into what I'm doing and like controlling and like locking things down as much as I can, being prone to eventually like avoiding things when I get overwhelmed and burning out and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a little blip of like, is that me or is that aspirational? And then a lot of, oh yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. And what I will just say is please leave to the side anything that doesn't fit, right? So
Hmm.
this is where we can't completely be sorted as if it was like the Harry Potter sorting hat. But what I will say too is that this is designed to give us some insight, right?
Hmm.
So I love that you were able to find some insight in that. That's great.
Hmm.
Is that something you and I had mentioned this prior to our recording? Is that something that you want a little bit of exploration to do together?
Yeah,
Can we
yeah.
do
If you're up
that?
for
Is
it,
that
I'd
okay?
love to do it. Yeah, let's do a little
Okay,
live
brilliant.
live coaching thing here and give people a taste of what this might look like. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, I would love to do that. That'd be so great. Thanks for like being so generous and allowing the space to explore this a little bit. Um, so tell me a little bit more about if there was one aspect of the this adaptive type, the keynote, that really resonated with you as far as like, yeah, that does represent a little bit of like a growth edge. You said something about the sort of um, overworking, maybe something along those lines. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. There were a couple parts. Certainly that component of being prone to overworking and perfectionism and control whenever I'm getting stressed, and then the component of really struggling with conflict and close relationships. When things get stressful, I will avoid difficult conversations with people close to me more often than I would like to.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's really unique about the keynote. Actually, the keynote is actually very good otherwise in sort of neutral situations of being able to have everyday boundaries. It's not usually an issue, right? You're able to
Hmm.
be straightforward or able to just say what your needs and preferences are. But it's in those close relationships that it ends up being particularly a little bit sticky. Um, and that makes a lot of sense. So for you, is there a situation that we could explore that came up for you recently where this was feels like it was true for you, something that stands out in your mind?
Let's take a break to hear from a featured partner. Y'all know that I love therapy notes, but I am not the only one. They have a 4.9 out of 5-star rating on trustpilot.com and Google, which makes them the #1 rated electronic health record system available for mental health folks today. They make billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth all incredibly easy. They also offer custom forms that you can send through the portal. For all the prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly offering e-prescribe as well. And maybe the most important thing for me is that they have live telephone support 7 days a week, so you can actually talk to a real person in a timely manner. If you're trying to switch from another EHR, the transition is incredibly easy. They'll import your demographic data free of charge, so you can get going right away. So if you're curious, or you want to switch, or you need a new EHR, try Therapy Notes for 2 months, absolutely free. You can go to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. Again, totally free, no strings attached. Check it out and see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes. The Clinical Assessment of Attention Deficit Adult, or CAT-A, is a comprehensive instrument that assesses symptoms of ADD and ADHD in adults, a self-report tool sensitive to the symptomology of attentional deficits both with and without hyperactivity. It's now available on PARI Connect, PAR's online assessment platform. Learn more at parinc.com/CATA. Let's get back to the podcast. Yes, let's see. I think so. My wife and I recently had a big conversation about role division within our home and who does what. And, our work schedules have shifted a bit over the years, and we're revisiting who does what. And we're running into some maybe differences of opinion or feeling about some of those roles and what's reasonable and what's not reasonable. So maybe we start there with that general overview, and then we can.
That's great. That's a very normal relationship conversation that anybody who's in a relationship can relate to this conversation, right? So this is perfect. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Totally comes up. So when it comes to this and to that particular situation, what is it that, and you think about how you handle that conversation, right? If you're to go back to that conversation, what would you want to get better at as far as either how it was handled, the outcome of that conversation, anything that showed up for you? Maybe it was how it felt for you.
Yeah. I think this is a theme for me, and I would have really liked to step outside of myself a little bit instead of kind of digging in and finding ways to sort of make my case and be able to understand her perspective a little bit more and really connect with that, be a little more empathic and come from I would say collaborative place versus I don't know, not selfish place exactly, but more of a personally centered place.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good goal, right? That we can step outside of our own worldview and be more connected to the people that we're speaking with, especially in these moments when there might be a little bit of conflict underneath the surface, right? There might be some difference in opinion. We might be making up some things like story-wise in our heads about what they're saying, what it means, right? Sure. So to pull ourselves out of that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you were able to do that, what would that look like in your conversations with your wife? How would that actually show up?
Yeah, I think it would be, gosh, a lot more listening, a lot more so basics, but we get in these moments and forget everything we know. But yeah, it's like just reiterate, making sure I'm connecting with what she's saying, and that she knows that I understand, that she knows I get what's going on for her. Yeah, probably not talking as much, certainly not forming as many rational arguments in my mind as we're talking, and just
Yeah.
more, yeah,
I love
yeah.
that. I love that. Right. So you sort of know when you're doing it because you're going to be talking less. There'll be less arguments in your mind. Right.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and she'll know and she'll understand and she'll be able to actually reflect that. Right. So you actually have some real evidence in that conversation that that's happening. Got it.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, for
That
sure.
makes a lot of sense. I love that. I'm really curious though around this for you. Like, what do you find yourself, if we were to go back to that conversation or maybe some other conversations where it's been a little bit more tricky,
Hmm.
what are you doing instead? Can you explain that a little bit?
Mm. What am I doing instead of what I know I should be doing or what I
Yeah, like
wish I was doing?
what's the reality, right? What does that look like for you?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, the reality is that I'm really getting locked into this pattern of like building an argument in my mind, like trying to be super rational, like convince her of all the reasons. And, um, of course, there's a little bit of like discrediting her version of reality, and this is why that's not true, and no, you remembered that wrong, and it's a lot of that. Like I said, it's almost like an extension of that perfectionism, like that very like logical, almost like task oriented approach where I go back to like details and logistics and just totally miss the empathy and the feeling part of it for her.
Yeah, yeah. You lose like the thread of the emotion that she's
Oh yeah.
experienced, sounds like, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
even for
yeah.
myself, like I don't really even share what I'm feeling during the whole thing. I could be like, "Oh gosh, I'm feeling defensive," and like what you're saying, I'm not doing enough around the house and my contributions don't matter. I mean, I could say that too, but I don't even really go that direction.
Yeah, yeah, but it's there. It's there.
Sure.
It's sort of bubbling under the surface for you, right? So
Sure.
it informs how we show up, right? And
Yeah.
this convincing, right? And the
Mm.
discrediting and the perfectionism that you talked about, and the arguing.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything else that you either do or don't do, right? Because we've heard a lot about what you say and what you don't say.
Yes. Gosh. Yeah, I tend to just laying it all out there. Probably not making good eye contact. I have this silly, I don't know, maybe other people do this, but I'll like in the middle of our discussion, I'll sort of like find a task to do. So I'll be like cleaning the kitchen and, trying to have this important conversation. And so, I'm like distracted, but not. It's really just like giving me some kind of outlet for whatever
Yeah,
energy, crunchy energy, as you said.
yeah,
Um, what else am I not doing? Um, yeah, I mean, just not like moving closer to her or, initiating any kind of like, connection, physical connection or anything like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm so struck. I love how you mentioned you give yourself a task to do,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think
Like I
that,
just start looking around. I'm like, what can I straighten up or what can I,
yeah,
fix or
yeah.
clean or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like one of the things that I've often found with my clients is that that is a really great way of creating a little bit of distance just from the immediacy of what's happening around you, right? And especially for male minds, one of the things that they found is that we sort of like to do things. It's easier for us to actually communicate when we're working with our hands, right?
Hmm.
So in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, you're really actually just like helping yourself out in that moment to turn
Hmm.
down that volume so you can be in the conversation, right? So
Yes.
it totally makes sense. Totally makes
Yes.
sense. Yeah, got it. Okay, great. Yeah. And by the way, there's no need to explain anything because this is courageous work, this sort of work. Talking about these things. These are not everyday conversations we have, right?
That's fair.
So if you did stop all of those ways, right, that are essentially undermining like how you want to be showing up actually, which is more about connective, more of she'll be understanding, less talking, less arguments, right? What's the concern? What might happen if you stopped all those ways that you're showing up? What are your worries or fears?
Mm. well, I might do it wrong. Like I might try to do all of that, then it's still not land.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly vulnerable, it lets down the shield, and then maybe I'll be, I don't know, taken advantage of, or um, something along those lines. Hmm, that's a really good question. I may have to think more about that. Those are the first things that pop up, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing it wrong, feeling vulnerable. You might be taken advantage of, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
what's the concern about that, about being taken advantage of? What might happen if that happens?
Hmm. Well, let me see if I follow that all the way down. Maybe it would be that I would end up, I don't know, doing everything around our house.
Mhm.
Um, that I might end up sort of unappreciated or underappreciated. Um, Maybe unrecognized. Yeah, things
Yeah.
along those.
Yeah. 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 Makes sense. Yeah. Right. So you'll be doing everything in the house. You'll feel underappreciated or not appreciated at all. It'll all fall on your shoulders. That's what I'm
Mm,
hearing.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering, what's the story behind that? Right. What do you make it mean that you have these concerns?
Ooh, what do I make it mean that I have the concerns? Like that there is something, like the very act of, or thought of, feeling of having those concerns is wrong somehow. Is that what you mean? Like that there's
Well, I'm curious, essentially, like what's the story that is behind these worries?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a lot. Okay, yeah, that's a lot easier question. Well, I mean, there then it's just like straight direct line to being a kid, growing up with mom chronically ill. I did a lot around the house. I was parentified. Um, Never really recognized, even though, they were pretty loving parents in some senses. Yeah, I mean, it's a straight line.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so funny. I love that your mind immediately went there. You knew it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a lot, right? It's this
Sure.
idea of um, I'm never recognized for what I do.
Mhm.
That's the story that I'm hearing. How does
Yeah.
that connect to you?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
Yes,
got it,
absolutely.
got it. Yeah, and so it's almost becomes this sort of if then statement in a way, right? If I'm the one doing all this work, then I'm never going to be recognized for it,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? So we just get to see that. We just get to see, right? This is the way that our brains work.
Hmm.
We just
Hmm.
get to sort of put it
Very
out there
much.
and have it as an object in the room. Like we don't need to um, hold it too close. We get to sort of pull it outside of ourselves, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
what we call that is a protective belief. Okay. And protective beliefs are often unconscious and they really explain what we do instead of our goal. And they're
Right.
designed to protect us against risk, right? And those risks for you, I'm curious what they might be.
Hmm. Well, yeah, the risk, gosh, it could be just, I don't know, being more present and engaged in the relationship. It could be just having a more genuine, sort of empathic conversation. I mean, there's a lot wrapped up in that. It all feels a little bit risky.
Yeah, it feels a little
Um,
risky. Yeah. Yeah. It feels exposing in some way, right?
sure, sure.
Yeah. 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 Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. Yeah. So we just get to see, right? We've got this goal, and the goal is to step outside of yourself and do more listening, right? And really what you want to get better at is her sort of knowing and understanding, and you less talking, less arguing, right? Less sort of plotting the argument, if you will, right? I'm sort of imagining a lawyer in a way, right? Like being like, but I've got a really good case for this, which I can absolutely like relate to, right? I think a lot of people can.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so what you find yourself doing instead is a lot of that convincing, a lot of convincing energy,
Definitely.
and maybe discrediting, right? Perfectionism, you said, was
Mm,
coming up. The concern that, you know what, I feel like I might be taken advantage of here. I feel
mhm,
like I'm going to do it wrong. I feel like I'm going to be really vulnerable, right? And that the under that protective belief underneath it being like, I'm never going to be recognized for this. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah.
And so what we get to see is that we've got our big goal and we've got these brakes and these accelerators,
Mm,
right? What you want to get better at, this idea of like, I want to get better at listening. I want to get better at connecting, about putting myself in her shoes, her understanding that, right? That's an accelerator to the goal. But
right.
then we've got the brake. And the brake is the convincing. It's the arguing. It's the perfectionism. It's some element of maybe like proving yourself. Like,
Mhm,
no, I'm already maybe doing these things, right?
mhm.
And so that's a break. And then we also have these concerns, all these worries, right? No, if I do it, I'm going to do it wrong. If I do this, I'm going to be vulnerable, right? I'm going to end up having to do everything in the house, right? You can see how our mind really globalizes this concern and makes it sort of absolute, right? And that's
Definitely.
really common when we're working with protective beliefs. They end up becoming quite bigger than the situation. And so that's sort of a hallmark that we know that there's a protective belief here, right? We can say, wow, this isn't really commensurate. Am I going to really have to do everything else? Probably not. But there's some part of us that feels like that's going to be the situation, right? So that's also a break. And then we have our protective beliefs. And the protective beliefs are the driver. So you've got one foot on the gas, you've got a foot on a couple of the brakes. It just starts to make sense why this feels like we're not really moving forward with it. So we just get to see that, right? Because the protective beliefs are there saying, hold on a second, but there's a real risk here of like, I'm going to be very, very vulnerable here. I'm going to be open to getting hurt, right? I might
Sure.
do it wrong. That's a risk of failure,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. So it's doing just a really, really good job of keeping you safe. So
Mhm,
that's
mhm,
all I hear when I'm talking to you about this. I'm like, how is Jeremy actually keeping himself really safe here?
mhm, mhm.
That's all you're doing.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is all you're doing, keeping yourself away from that risk,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
you get to keep this risk, the relationship with this risk, if it feels like it's too big to loosen at the moment, right? There's nothing that we actually have to do around it.
Mhm, mhm.
I'm not attached to it. Nothing to do with me. But I also say, like, wouldn't it be a shame? Because what
Yeah.
might happen if we were maybe just to play around with shifting that relationship with that risk a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like that.
So you can just see this has nothing to do with
Yeah.
the goal. This work
Yeah.
has nothing to do with the goal.
Mhm.
It has to do with this relationship that we have with ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm on board. I'm on board. This
Yeah.
is yeah, I love the process. I love the process. Of course, I'm going through this with like two minds, right? Like trying to be 100% engaged and like the
Yeah.
observing mind and oh wow, what's this like? But yeah, I think it's right on. I could see this like easily translating to business stuff and like any other, risk that we are protecting ourselves from.
Completely. It is. Yeah. And that's why when clients come to me, first of all, thank you for that. I just want to create space for
Oh
that.
my
Thank you
gosh.
for
Yeah.
allowing me to coach you, especially on your podcast and being so vulnerable and being so open. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a pretty, actually, I mean, surprisingly kind of powerful experience. I'm going to be thinking about this stuff. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's why really as a client, you can bring whatever is going on for you. And that's why I said when we at the end, it has nothing to do with the goal, right? Bring your goal. Great. Bring your goal. I'm so unattached to your goal.
Mm.
As a coach, I really am. But what I am standing for is what is stopping you from moving forward through that goal, and how can I support you in pushing past that,
Hmm.
right? The goal almost doesn't really matter. It's really this, what is this relationship with this risk? How are you experiencing overwhelm? How are you experiencing worry and concern, right? How can we actually start to expand you so that way you can include some of this risk in moving forward? Great. And then we're off to the races.
Yes.
It's to me, it's really sort of at the root of everything that we're doing.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I picked a personal example, but there are any number of business examples as well, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
this comes up with. I mean, do you find a pretty close relationship between goals and risk? I mean, it seems like they're tied together, or they can be anyway. Like people set goals, but then, goals feel risky when you really dive into them. I don't know. How do you conceptualize that?
That's a great question. I think absolutely. I think that our relationship with our goals are often very intertwined with our relationship with risk, but also with our personalities,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So if
Yeah.
you consider yourself, there's some other adaptotypes, for example, that we can explore. If you're somebody who is a bit of a natural rebel, right?
Hmm.
And I call that the outsider, right?
Uh-huh.
And so you're going to be a little bit more goal adverse. So goals for you just aren't going to be super important, right?
Gotcha.
You're someone who really you really prioritize your identity, making sure that that's intact, and making sure that your values are being honored, and your principles, right? And so those things are going to come first. There's also the visionary, right? The visionary is someone who is very, very much about moving forward with a very deliberate plan, step by step, and just being open at every single step to seeing what happens, right? And adjusting as they go along, right? So they're a little bit more goal agnostic.
Mm.
And so for them, it's hard to what happens is going to happen. They're going to adjust to that as they go along.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different ways that we can actually relate to our goals that is very much connected with our relationship with perceived psychological risk, and also about just how we see ourselves in respect to goals, and how goals either work for us. For certain people, goals are a really great way to just get everything done, right? They're just like their businesses are just a way, for example, to just a means to achieve their goals. And they're incredibly ambitious. We know these folks that are just like on it 24/7, super type A, right? And that's great. That's great for them. It really works for them. I am not one of those people.
Right. Right.
But I'm a little bit in awe of them when I'm around them, right? So it's yeah, we can, it really reflects who we are, as well as our relationship with worry and concern and self-doubt and risk, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is fascinating stuff. I think I told you before we started recording, like going through the quiz, the adaptotype quiz, it was actually hard. It was hard to choose the right answer, which to me is a good sign because, um, it's not the most obvious thing. You have to really think through, and some of the answers were very nuanced, and I feel like they really fit, the way that I deal with goals and problems and being overwhelmed. And,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the whole experience.
It was interesting putting it together too, because like I told you, the nuance to me, I see it as a massive difference in these things. But I got some feedback that it was a little too nuanced, and so
Mm-hmm.
I tried to make it as straightforward as I could be, while still retaining the essence of what I thought was important there. But yeah, there's actually like I think a little bit of shift, like a 5% shift either way in some of these answers actually can be quite significant in explaining who we are and how we're showing up in these situations.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
This has been a fantastic conversation. Gosh, I mean, I know that there's so much more that we could talk about, and we didn't even really touch the actual, you know, nuts and bolts, I suppose, of the work and branding and marketing and, this other kind of half of things. But I hope that folks are getting a good sense of how you approach this work and, the kind of natural extension into then how do we actually create some of those materials and
Yeah.
put ourselves
Yeah.
out there. And who
Absolutely.
knows,
No,
maybe
it's great.
there's another conversation at some point.
Sure, sure. No, this has been really great. Thank you so much for having me on. I love doing this work. I think this is the work that we all need to be doing, frankly, and including myself. And I have my own coach that I work with, and I thank God for them because they really keep me honest and clear and help me put the all the carts and horses in the right order. And it's very fulfilling work. So I'm so happy to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you are doing it. Yeah, it's super important. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us need this kind of thing. So, I mean, if folks, I'm sure there are folks out there who are intrigued, maybe want to like take the adaptotype quiz, maybe want to learn more about you. What's the best way to do that?
Best way to do that is by visiting my website. So it's scottrobson.net. So SCOTTROBSON, scottrobson.net. And if you'd like to reach out, I'm also on Instagram at scott.robson.coaching. And I'd love to hear from you. I think that this is, I'm also really curious now that the adaptotypes are in the wild, how are people experiencing them? Please let me know. This is my little brainchild, but you sort of cross your fingers and hope it's landing for folks. I would love to hear people's experiences with it.
That sounds good. Yeah, folks, definitely check it out. And congratulations on dealing with what I imagine is some of your own risk and
Yes.
feeling overwhelmed sometimes and getting this out there. It's really cool. I appreciate
Never
it.
leaves us.
Thanks.
Never leaves us. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Always grateful to have you here. I hope that you take away some information that you can implement in your practice and in your life. Any resources that we mentioned during the episode will be listed in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. If you like what you hear on the podcast, I would be so grateful if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're a practice owner or aspiring practice owner, I'd invite you to check out the Testing Psychologist mastermind groups. I have mastermind groups at every stage of practice development, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. We have homework, we have accountability, we have support, we have resources. These groups are amazing. We do a lot of work and a lot of connecting. If that sounds interesting to you, you can check out the details at thetestingpsychologist.com/consulting. You can sign up for a pre-group phone call and we will chat and figure out if a group could be a good fit for you. Thanks so much. The information contained in this podcast and on the Testing Psychologist website are intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no doctor-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host or guests of this podcast and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of any mental health practitioner or medical provider, please seek one in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please find a supervisor with an expertise that fits your needs.